I married Daniel because it made sense. That's the easiest way to explain it. He was kind, steady, successful. The kind of man who knew what wine to bring to a dinner party and never forgot to send his mother flowers on her birthday. My parents adored him. My friends told me I was lucky. And for a long time, I tried to believe them. We met at a charity gala one of those sterile, elegant evenings with violin quartets and white wine that tasted like soap. He had smiled at me from across the room, the kind of practiced smile that seemed carved from habit. Our conversation was light, pleasant, effortless. Within a year, we were married. But marriage, I learned, is not made of smiles and shared drinks. It's made of quiet mornings and empty beds, of silence over breakfast, of sleeping beside someone who stops hearing you. I don't think Daniel meant to drift away. I think he believed that showing up was enough. He bought me gifts when he forgot anniversaries. He planned vacations, but left me alone in hotel rooms while he took conference calls. I tried to be understanding. I tried to be patient. But slowly, something inside me began to retreat. Our home was beautiful white walls, polished floors, oversized windows that swallowed sunlight. Everything looked clean, designed, curated. It felt more like a showroom than a life. I moved through it like a guest in a gallery, careful not to smudge the glass or disturb the stillness. Then, one evening, Daniel came home with a bottle of red and a quick kiss on the cheek. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that his father would be staying with us for a few weeks. Adrian was having renovations done on his place, and rather than book a hotel, Daniel offered our guest room. I nodded, not particularly moved. I had never met Adrian before. He lived on the coast and rarely visited. Daniel rarely spoke about him, except to say they were different. Adrian arrived 2 days later. He was older, of course, but not in the brittle, slowing down kind of way. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his presence filling a room without demanding it. He had kind eyes, a voice like aged oak, and a subtle, effortless charm. Where Daniel was polished and poised, Adrian was textured, weathered in a way that felt earned, not aged. We shook hands in the foyer, and he looked at me not through me, not past me, but at me. It was a simple thing, but I felt it. A stillness, a recognition. It caught me off guard. The days that followed were ordinary. Adrian read in the mornings, made his own coffee, and sometimes whistled when he cooked. He asked questions not the polite kind, but the ones that made you think, the kind that waited patiently for real answers. He noticed things that I liked. My tea too hot, that I avoided the living room in the afternoons because of the glare, that I sighed before answering questions I didn't want to hear. Daniel, meanwhile, was rarely home. A new deal was closing. Long meetings, late nights. The usual when he was home, he was tired and quiet. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was logistical groceries, cleaners, emails. I wanted to ask if he noticed how distant we'd become, but I was afraid of the answer. Or worse, the lack of one night. Sometime past midnight, I went to the kitchen for water. The apartment was dark, save for a dim light above the stove. I didn't expect to see Adrian sitting there, barefoot, a book in one hand and a mug of tea in the other. He looked up, offered a soft smile. Couldn't sleep. He asked, I shook my head and joined him without thinking. We sat in silence. For a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. I don't remember who spoke first or what we talked about, only that it felt easy, safe. At one point, I looked at him and said, I think I forgot how to be myself in this house. I hadn't planned to say it. I hadn't even known I felt it until the words escaped. He didn't respond right away. Then he reached across the table and placed his hand gently over mine. Just for a second. No words, just warmth, just presence. Something shifted in that moment, not loudly, not obviously, but unmistakably. And I think, deep down I knew my life was about to change. I just didn't know how much. Not yet. The days passed with a strange rhythm. Adrian made himself at home, without disrupting the space. He moved quietly, thoughtfully, like someone who understood the weight of silence and knew how to share it without making it heavy. I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen when I knew he'd be there. It wasn't intentional, or at least that's what I told myself, but slowly, His presence became something I noticed in its absence. Asterisk, we never spoke about that moment. At the table, he didn't bring it up, and neither did I, but something unspoken now lingered in the air between us. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something gentler, more disarming a sense of being known. Asterisk, one morning, I watched him peel an orange with the kind of patience I had forgotten existed. When he caught me staring, he smiled faintly. Asterisk, you always look like you're thinking. 3 thoughts at once, he said. Asterisk, I laughed awkwardly. I think that's just my default setting. Asterisk, he nodded. You should allow yourself more space to breathe. Asterisk, it sounded like simple advice. But the way he said it landed somewhere deeper. I carried those words with me all day. That night, I waited for Daniel to come home until well past 10. He texted to say he was staying at a hotel near the office. Too tired to drive. No apology, no warmth. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone down without replying. Asterisk, I found Adrian on the balcony, sipping something from a glass tumbler. The city buzzed below, but up here it was quiet. He offered me a seat. I sat. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence again felt familiar. Easy, asterisk, Daniel doesn't see you. Adrian said, almost absently, like he was commenting. On the weather, asterisk, I looked at him. That's not fair. Asterisk, it's not meant to be an accusation, he replied gently. Just an observation. Asterisk, he was right though. Daniel didn't see me, not the way I wanted to be seen. He saw the version of me that fit into his life, polite, presentable, agreeable. But the parts of me that didn't serve his narrative were invisible. With Adrian, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to reduce myself to fragments. Asterisk, the next evening, Adrian cooked dinner, rosemary chicken, roasted potatoes, and sautéed greens. The kitchen smelled like warmth, like someone cared enough to put effort into something small. We ate together, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed, not politely, not out of habit. A real laugh, sharp and sudden, pulled from somewhere. I thought had closed. Asterisk, afterward, we sat on the couch. A documentary played on the TV, but neither of us was watching. The space between us had shrunk. His knee brushed against mine, just barely. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't expect to like you this much, Adrian said softly. I turned toward him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried something unsteady. Vulnerability, maybe, or restraint. Asterisk, you don't have to say things like that, I whispered. Asterisk, I know, but I wanted to. Asterisk, a pause stretched between us, long and fragile. Then, as if sensing we'd reached the edge of something dangerous, he stood. Asterisk, good night, he said, not meeting my eyes. Asterisk, good night, I echoed, watching him disappear down the hallway. Asterisk, I sat there long after he left, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning bell. I told myself it was just attention, just gratitude. I was lonely, and he was kind. Nothing more, but I knew I was lying. The next morning, I caught myself dressing differently, not dramatically, just enough to feel noticed, a fitted shirt, a cleaner shave. I told myself it was for me, for confidence. But when Adrian looked up from his newspaper and smiled, I knew the truth. Asterisk, this wasn't just a passing connection. This was something unfolding beneath my skin, quiet, patient, persistent. And whatever it wasn't going away. Coffee and watched him stir cream into his cup. And something inside me stirred to something I couldn't ignore much longer. It started raining the following evening, soft at first, then urgent, like the sky had been holding something in for too long. I stood by the window, arms wrapped around myself, watching the water blur the lights of the city. Behind me, the house was still. Daniel hadn't come home again. I didn't bother asking why. Asterisk, Adrian appeared beside me without a sound, holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered one, and I took it with a small nod. His presence, quiet and constant, had become a strange comfort. Like a lighthouse in fog. Asterisk, I always liked the rain, he said after a moment. It cleans things, reveals what's been hiding under the dust. Asterisk, I glanced at him. And what if you don't like what you see underneath? Asterisk, his eyes met mine. Steady. Then at least it's honest. Asterisk, that word lingered between honest. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Not in my marriage, not in my own reflection. There was a part of me that had dimmed over time, starved of attention, of real connection. And now, under Adrian's gaze, I could feel it flickering to life again. Asterisk, we sat on the couch. The sound of rain tapping the windows like a rhythm only we could hear. The air was thick with something unnamed. Every movement, every glance, felt like a question that hadn't yet been asked. Asterisk, I used to envy Daniel, Adrian said suddenly. His voice was soft, distant. Not for his success, not for the life he built, but for the chance to love someone who might have loved him back. Asterisk, I looked at him, heart stuttering in my chest. You don't know what we have. Asterisk, no, he said, turning to face me fully. But I know what I see now, and I know what's missing. Asterisk, I should have stopped it then. I should have stood up, walked away, drawn a line we wouldn't cross. But I didn't because some part of me had been waiting, aching for someone. To see me, hear me, not just exist beside me, but with me. And in that moment, it wasn't Daniel I thought of. It was the man sitting next to me, eyes heavy with restraint and honesty. Asterisk, he reached out slowly, hesitantly, as if giving me a chance to pull away. I didn't. His fingers brushed mine, tentative and trembling. The touch was feather-light, but it set something alight inside me. Asterisk, I'm not proud of this, he whispered. Asterisk, neither am I replied. But still, neither of us moved. His hand closed gently around mine, not possessively, not hungrily, just there present, real. The room felt warmer. Or maybe I was just burning from the inside out. Asterisk, we stayed like that, fingers intertwined, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever spell we'd cast between us. It wasn't about lust. It wasn't even about betrayal, at least, not in that moment. It was about being seen. It was about two people, each carrying their own quiet ache. Finding a mirror in the other dot, Asterisk eventually, he pulled away. Slowly, respectfully, as if to say, this isn't the time, not yet. I should sleep, he said, voice rough. I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak, Asterisk, as he disappeared down the hallway. I sat alone, hand still tingling from where he'd touched me. I stared at the wall, at the shadows that now felt heavier, more complicated. Asterisk, I had crossed a line, even without doing anything. Emotionally, I was already on the other side. And in that space, nothing was simple anymore. Every glance, every word, every breath shared in silence. Asterisk Daniel returned the next day with tired eyes and a distracted apology. He kissed my forehead like I was porcelain and asked if I'd remembered to pay the gardener. I nodded, pretending to care, pretending to still be part of whatever version of us he thought existed. Asterisk, but something inside me had shifted. Not just because of Adrian, but because I'd finally seen what I'd been pretending not to feel for so long. Asterisk, and now, I couldn't unsee it. Asterisk, the house felt quieter after that night, like something had broken beneath the surface. And the silence that followed wasn't peaceful, but fragile. I went through the motions. I cooked. I answered emails. I laughed when I was supposed to. But inside, I was caught in a current I couldn't escape, swept between the man I had promised myself to and the man who had made me feel like myself again. Asterisk. Adrian kept his distance the next few days, not coldly, but carefully. He smiled when our eyes met, nodded politely at breakfast, offered casual small talk, but the quiet between us was different now. It wasn't empty, it was full, charged with everything we hadn't said and everything we see, OULDN. Single quotes to Asterisk Daniel, meanwhile, had returned to his routine. He asked about meetings, talked about traffic. He brought home takeout and watched the news, with a glass of wine, never noticing how I flinched when he touched my shoulder, how I looked away before his kisses could land. I wondered if he felt the shift between us, if he noticed I was somewhere else, even while sitting beside him. Asterisk, but if he did, he never said, asterisk, one night, unable to sleep. I wandered into the living room and found Adrian sitting alone, again book in hand, glasses perched low on his nose. The light cast soft shadows across his face, and when he looked up, I saw the same restrained sadness in his eyes. Asterisk, I didn't mean for this to happen, I said quietly. Asterisk, he closed the book and set it down. Neither did I. Asterisk, we sat there. A few feet apart, like two people on either side of an invisible wall we weren't sure we could or should cross. Asterisk, I don't think I've ever been in love, I said, surprising even myself. Not really. I think I convinced myself I was because it made everything easier. Asterisk, he looked at me for a long time. Then he asked, and what do you feel now? Asterisk, I swallowed, confused, guilty, alive. Asterisk, Adrian leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You don't have to explain anything to me. I know where we stand. Asterisk, I nodded, grateful for the dignity he always offered me, even in the midst of something so messy. But I also knew I couldn't keep pretending. Not to myself, not to him. Asterisk, there's something about you, I whispered. Something I've needed for a long time, even before I knew it. Asterisk, he didn't smile. He didn't reach for me. He just watched me, eyes steady and understanding. Then do something about it, he said. But whatever you choose, make it yours. Not out of guilt, not out of habit, out of truth. Asterisk, those words stayed with me. For hours, for days. Asterisk, that weekend, Daniel left again some networking retreat. At a mountain resort, I didn't ask questions. I didn't pretend to care. When he kissed me goodbye, I stood still and he didn't notice. Asterisk, the house belonged to just me and Adrian again. But this time it felt different. Like a final breath. Before something irreversible. Asterisk, that evening, I stood in the hallway outside his room. I didn't knock. I didn't call his name. I just stood there, waiting for what I didn't know. Courage, maybe. Clarity. He opened the door without a word, as if he'd sensed me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I stepped forward. He stepped back, and the world tipped. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. There were no declarations or promises. Just two people meeting in the quiet middle of everything they'd been afraid to admit. Asterisk, what happened that night wasn't betrayal in the way the world defines it. It wasn't lust or recklessness. It was need. Recognition. A breath I hadn't taken in years. Asterisk, but the next morning, the weight of it all settled on my chest. Because the truth, however deeply felt, doesn't come without consequence. Asterisk, I woke before Adrian, pulled on my robe, and stepped out into the cold morning light. The city outside was beginning its day, but my mind was suspended between what had been and what could no longer stay hidden. Asterisk, I heard his footsteps behind me, slow and hesitant. We have to talk, I said, not turning around. I know, he replied. Asterisk, and so we stood there, not as lovers, not as family, but as two people who had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, ready, at last, to face the truth in its full, devastating clarity. Asterisk.